Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM's POTUS.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Friday, December 20th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, Tom, Elon Musk seems to be once again at the center of things. And the Democrats are trolling President-elect Trump about him. Here is Connecticut Congressman Rosa DeLauer on the House floor talking about the richest man in the world.
They got scared because President Musk told them, President Musk said, don't do it. Don't do it. Shut the government down. Imagine. What does he know about what people go through is when the government shuts down.
So, Tom, what do you make of the troll? And is he really in charge?
Well, no, he's not in charge, obviously. And it did seem like there was a coordinated effort. I mean, if you looked at the Washington Post this morning, there was all the Democrats and folks in the media were talking about the co-president, the shadow president, president in chief, whatever. Elon Musk is running the show and Donald Trump is just his puppet. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But look, Elon Musk does wield a decent amount of power. He is an influential guy. He owns and operates the largest social media platform in the world. And when he tweets about stuff, you know, he obviously gets attention. And he and Vivek Ramaswamy were the first ones to sort of, you know, bring attention to this CR that Mike Johnson had negotiated and was trying to get passed. And they ended up, you know, blowing it up along with Donald Trump and JD Vance, who both, by the way, signed on to a statement against it as well. And so, look, I understand. I think Democrats think this is a good way to get under Trump's skin, right? To tell him that he's not really in charge and people think somebody else is running the show. Like, that's a good Trump being sort of as vain and egotistical as he is, that'll really needle him and they'll enjoy that. And the other thing too is it makes for a good sort of media narrative. And as I mentioned, the Washington Post, I think they had I was laughing with Carl, but they had 5 people. The byline had 5 people on it to write this story in the Washington Post this morning. I mean, just imagine the amount of resources that went into a story saying that Elon Musk, all the academics and the experts are now worried about the amount of power that Elon Musk has accumulated in just such a short time. And we are really just a hair's breadth away from an oligarchy.
Carl, do you see it that way?
Well, I was struck by Rosa DeLauer. I don't ever make fun of people's physical appearance, but her body language.
You make fun of my physical appearance all the time, Cannon. Come on, don't lie.
You're a handsome guy, Tom. That's all I'm going to say.
Now you're making fun.
But her body language and the accent that she was using, it was like theatrical, and I think part of that was deliberate, but part of it, she reminded me of Marty Feldman in Young Frankenstein, the Igor character, you know.
It wasn't the blue hair, Carl.
It was. I think it's dark purple, really. But I don't know. But the President Musk thing, she didn't use it as a throwaway line. She mentioned it like she'd stumbled onto some great truth, and that's kind of an insult to our intelligence for the reason Tom pointed out. Do you guys remember there used to be this thing, Journo List? And it was,
right.
It was left-leaning or partisan Democrat journalists and Democratic activist players, and they were all shared the same thing. And then it went away when they got some attention. But you knew it didn't ever really go away because there was a tell. And what it would be, it's like if you're in a class and you're cheating off the smartest kid in the class, and the teacher can out you that the smartest kid in the class gets one wrong answer, and that's the one wrong answer you have too, and the same wrong answer. Well, this is the wrong answer. And it shows that they're still coordinating because co-president, that's silly. They said this about Dick Cheney, if you remember, George W. Bush. And Bush didn't even bother to respond to it. I privately just scoff at it. And Cheney would too. We have one president. Well, we're supposed to have one president. But
right. Well, that's a good question right there. Who is the president right now?
And so I think the Democrats you think they'd be shy about talking about who the real co-president is because that leads us into yesterday's conversation, so I won't go there again. But the other thing is, I think to Tom's point, it's almost like they think they'll say this and then Trump will fire Elon Musk because Trump's ego can't handle it. I don't know if he'll do that or not, if their gambit will work. But I imagine, my guess is Elon Musk and Trump would laugh at it. But remember, Trump did say that he kind of trolled Elon Musk himself in a press conference about a couple of weeks ago. Tom, remember this? He said, "Yeah, Elon Musk, he won't go away. We can't get him to leave."
Yeah. So Elon Musk, he did put out on X. He said, in his defense, he said, "All I can do is bring the things to the attention of the people, so they may voice their support if they so choose." I mean, it does seem, Tom, that it's kind of anti-democratic to say that someone shouldn't have a say or be able to make his opinion known. The fact that people take his opinion seriously and that he does have this rather large platform to do it. But it's not like the Democrats don't have platforms as well, and that other billionaires who favor the Democrats don't have platforms.
Right. He also tweeted, he said, the political and legacy media puppets all got their new instructions yesterday and are now parroting the same message to drive a wedge between Donald Trump and me. They will fail. So Elon sort of sees what's happening here. But to your point, Andy, I mean, yes, it is also sort of ironic that because he's as wealthy as he is, somehow he's not allowed, or shouldn't be allowed, to have an opinion or have any sort of influence on the process, even though, I mean, again, Democrats have tons of very wealthy individuals who participate in their politics,
right.
And no problem. But
yeah, I mean, the idea that someone would say,
we were never talking about oligarchy when, it's George Soros or any of these other folks who are giving, tons of money and having all this influence on whether it's the political process, the electoral process, doesn't matter. That's fine. But, Elon Musk shows up and suddenly we're headed to oligarchy. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous.
But you say that, Tom, but I mean, the Democrats, they're rediscovering something that they used to stand for. And I think that may be healthy. Donald Trump's a billionaire. Elon Musk is the richest man in the history of the world. Vivek Ramaswamy made millions at a young age. And when Rosa DeLauro says they want to close the government and they don't know the hardship that'll be on people, working class people, that's actually been a winning message for the Democrats in the past. And I would argue that it's where they should be. And if they had been there all along, they might have done better in this past election. I mean, I think they forgot about working people. So yeah, there's the silver lining in the cloud, Tom, is they're talking about what they should be talking about.
It's situational ethics, Carl. I mean, come on, you've been around Washington long enough to know.
You say that. You say that. I say they're rediscovering their healthier impulses.
Okay.
Well, Carl, speaking of rediscovering their roots, one of the parlor games in Washington is for various Democrats to sort of talk about how they're going to make their way back to power. The latest entry is the leader of the House Progressive Caucus, Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington State. She has a piece in Newsweek that's on the front page of RCP today. Headline is "The Democrats' Path Back to Power." And Carl, she says, to win back working class and poor voters of every race, it's past time for a rebuild of the Democratic Party. We must urgently and authentically communicate to people that we will stand up for them. She goes on in that sort of vein. I'm sure you read the piece. What do you make of it? And is she right?
Well, Bernie Sanders said something similar right after the election. And when you start talking about what that means, does it mean going away from identity politics? Well, they won't go that far. But probably does it mean single payer is coming out and saying outright they want a single payer health care plan? Sure. The progressives would like to do that. The policy things, to me, they don't have a majority yet, but that's how you build majority. The progressives saying, okay, we didn't make our case on the issues well enough. That translates into policies. Some of them are popular, some aren't. But in terms of speaking to working class people, she doesn't go there. But part of that means not saying some of the stuff you've been saying in the past and getting away from it and not making, not putting, if your key issue is transgender politics, even people who are not hostile to transgender people in any way think, oh, well, that's where your energy is. You don't really care about the things that are important to most families. So I think this is the conversation they're going to have for the next 3.5 years till they get a nominee, and that nominee will set the the agenda. But I think the progressives should push on some of these populist economic issues. They're going to have to figure out how they get away from the the excesses of identity politics. They haven't. They kind of say, well, we've done this, but they haven't really walked any of it back.
So, Tom, what did you make of the piece? Because I think what Carl's right about is that there was sort of a lack of sort of the social issues in this piece. There was a lot about fighting tax cuts, promoting the minimum wage, expanding Medicare, sort of old-fashioned, lunch bucket, blue collar Democratic stuff, and not a lot of woke stuff. And this is from the head of the Progressive Caucus. So the fact that stuff wasn't in there, maybe we're reading too much into it. It's only a short piece in Newsweek, but what did you make of it?
Well, I mean, so if you're a reader of Real Clear Politics and a listener of this program, you'll know that we had another piece on the exact same subject by Rahm Emanuel. It was in the Washington Post. It was on our front page. We talked about it on this radio show a couple of days ago. And that's sort of the centrist DLC, for lack of a better word, position. And now we have the progressive position, which is, to your point, I mean, there was the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is, what about, the social issues, and have Democrats and progressives gone too far with respect? She didn't talk about that at all. And there's a difference between just omitting it and what Rahm said, which is, listen, we've got to talk to voters where they are on issues, tough issues like crime and immigration. And we can't, what was the line? It was something like, when you're getting carjacked and everything in the pharmacy is locked down, like that's a bad sign. You can't ignore that
crime statistics.
Exactly. You can't just cite crime statistics and think that's going to be enough, because that's what people are living in their day to day. So I think, look, the piece is fine, and I do think Democrats and progressives. Look, Bernie Sanders was popular for a reason, and he was popular along with Trump because they were two sides of that same populist coin. So I think that's fine for progressives to say, listen, we have to formulate policies, progressive populist policies that reconnect us to the working class. That's all fine. But I don't think they can do that and by totally ignoring or omitting or lighting over these other issues that, again, Rahm Emanuel was willing to sort of speak directly to. And I think that, to me, they have to have both. They can't just have one or the other.
Well, guys, we're going to have to take a break. We're going to be back in a second. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm talking with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We'll return right after this.
Online at RealClearPolitics.com.
On air on Sirius XM Channel 124.
Real Clear Politics is on POTUS.
Honest reporting and an authentic picture of public disclosure. This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And guys, I'm sure you saw it. The Politifact organization put out their Lie of the Year. This is actually a poll they do of their readers, where the Politifact editors ask their readers to choose among a list of 10 lies that the editors have chosen. Here's a hint as to what they chose.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets. The people that live there.
That is the great Kifnis. The Kifnis is his name, who put that together. He's a South African musician. This is one of my favorite cuts of the year. But Tom, what do you make of that being the lie of the year? 54% of the respondents to the survey chose that as the biggest lie.
Look, PolitiFact is this idea is part of the quote unquote fact checking, right, regime, where they basically, which is not unbiased and routinely fact checks Republicans and lets Democrats get away with all sorts of craziness. Look, of the 10 that they chose to submit for their readers to vote on, 7 of the 10 were Donald Trump related or JD Vance Republican related. I think only 1 or 2. One was Kamala Harris, one was Tim Walz, and one was Joe Biden. And the Joe Biden one was him saying he wasn't going to pardon his son. So it wasn't exactly a I would say, a balanced sample for people to choose from. And I do think, in my personal opinion, I mean, after what we've seen the last couple of days, I think the biggest lie of the year wasn't a particular, well, I guess you could have chosen any statement saying Joe Biden was, sharp as a tack, because it's clear now from what we knew and suspected is now being borne out by people who are willing to leak and talk to reporters about how debilitated he was. I mean, that to me is sort of the biggest scandal, not just of the year, but maybe of the decade, or even the
of the century,
which
means of the millennium.
Yeah, I mean, so, but yeah, and the thing about Donald Trump, right? Him saying that in the debate, I remember when he did it because we talked about it at the time because. People were like, is he going to go there? Is he going to say it? Of course he did. And everyone's like, oh my God, I can't believe he said it. Because there was some concern, and it wasn't like this was made up out of whole cloth, right? There were some reports, and there was some concern, and there was some testimony before the local city council and of the like. But it wasn't, so I don't,
Wait, you're defending the lie of the year. You're saying it wasn't even a lie. Come on, Tom.
I'm saying it wasn't 100%. There's gray matter in there, Carl.
All right, hold on.
Maybe it was 80%
a lie. Jump in. I'm going to save Tom here from him. So it was a spectacularly crazy rumor. In some ways, not a lie at all, because the idiots repeating it may have thought it was true. But it was a pretty wild statement, and the goofiest thing on the campaign by far. But the lie of the year is what Tom said it was. The Wall Street Journal didn't just have a story out this week. They had a story several months ago about Joe Biden. And these people were attacked for their reporting by Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, by any number of commentators, liberal commentators, and by Kamala Harris herself. Nancy Pelosi said that Joe Biden belongs on Mount Rushmore. If you're going to use this ridiculous fiction about Haitians eating cats and dogs as a lie, well, then what Pelosi said was a lie. She knew better than that. And so that's they said, and they were lying to themselves, and they lied to the American people, and they lied to the press. And so then they got stuck with a nominee that they couldn't, who only had 107 days to campaign. And by the way, speaking of lies, Kamala Harris repeated word for word Joe Biden's fake origin story that he decided to run for president when he saw these tiki torches in Charlottesville and these neo-Nazis, and Donald Trump said they were very fine people. What he said was they should be condemned totally.
Right. And
when Kamala Harris is repeating Joe Biden's lies, I think that signaled to independent voters that they needed a change of pace. So even though it's little remembered and she was repeating something Biden said over and over again, that might be my vote for lie of the year.
Yeah. Well, this is the fourth year in a row that the readers of PolitiFact have chosen a Donald Trump quote as the lie of the year. So that might give you some indication. I was sort of struck by this, that the Joe Biden, I will not pardon Hunter, which is turned out to be a bold-faced lie, and there's no wiggle room on that.
Wait.
There's
wiggle room. How about this, Andy? Is there wiggle room? Maybe he forgot he said it.
Well, no, I don't even think Joe Biden forgot it. But
So
only
what was it,
6% thought that was the lie of the year. That sort of struck me. I would have thought that would have been higher.
And came in third behind the Donald Trump saying that the Biden administration stole $1 billion from FEMA for illegal migrants as opposed to hurricane survivors in Western North Carolina. So
is that a lie?
What's that?
Was it true or untrue? I never saw the fact check.
That was
on
pants on fire, Carl.
I'm sorry. I stand corrected, obviously.
So, Georgia, on Thursday, Georgia. State Appeals Court officially removed Fani Willis from the state's case against Donald Trump. Carl, this is, of course, the election interference case. The decision reads in part, "This is the rare case in which disqualification is mandated and no other remedy will suffice to restore public confidence in the integrity of these proceedings. That's pretty harsh stuff. And court also criticized the trial court judge, Scott McAfee, for not disqualifying her in the first place. So Carl, this isn't the end of the trial, but it's a significant setback, of course, for the prosecution. What do you make of her removal?
Well, yeah, it may go to the Georgia Supreme Court. This was the of all the lawfare things, this was the most ambitious. Bonnie Willis, the local prosecutor in Atlanta, repeated all the Jack Smith stuff and then threw in a bunch of other people allegedly violating state law, RICO statutes. She wanted to indict Kelly Loeffler. She wanted to indict Lindsey Graham. She wanted to indict anybody who said publicly that this wasn't the most secure election in history. Then she goes out and uses the RICO statute, goes out and gets her lover, Nathan Wade, who knows nothing, who has no history prosecuting RICO statutes, pays him hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes,
$250 an hour
in state funds. Now we know that he was up in Washington talking to people in the Biden White House. The whole thing, it's a travesty, and it doesn't make what Donald Trump did in the aftermath of the 2020 election right, calling Secretary of State Raffensperger and saying, find me 11,000 votes. It was pretty gross. It wasn't a crime, but it was despicable. I think that if the Democrats had shown more, had been more temperate in their response, it actually would have helped them more. I think there was a backlash to their overreach. I think people are rightly worried about lawfare. And I think in the end, it helped Trump. They hoped they wanted to put Trump in prison in Georgia. That was the goal here.
Tom, is this the end of his troubles in Georgia, you think?
I think so. I don't think this case is going to end up surviving, and all the rest of them have gone away. And I think this was the final,
except for the 34 felonies in New York.
Yeah, right. Death blow to the lawfare regime. I mean, remember, right? And Fannie Willis, like, Trump had to fly down to Georgia. That's where his mugshot came from.
Yes,
right. Fulton County. He checked into Fulton County jail. That mugshot became one of the iconic, pieces of this campaign. People put it on T-shirts. Trump himself used it in some of his ads and things. I mean, it's, to Carl's point, it was gross.
All right, well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon, but don't go away. We'll be back with more right after this.
It's real, it's clear, and it's on POTUS.
It's Real Clear Politics.
Sirius XM 124.
Real Clear Politics. A neutral, even-handed arbiter of political data. You're listening to POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Phil Wegmann. He is our White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Mr. Wegmann, good to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you wrote a piece for us this morning, appeared on the front page. I urge our listeners and viewers to go check it out, about Turning Point Action, Charlie Kirk. They're having their annual, I don't know, what do they call it? The America Fest or something? It's like
America Fest.
America Fest. Okay. It's like a big gathering that has been going on for a few years now. Even though Turning Point Action is pretty new and Charlie Kirk is pretty young, this has become like a big deal, a big event. I mean, he's very good at putting on these, big stage displays with the lights and the stuff. Generates a lot of interest and enthusiasm. But tell everybody about, what about it this year now that, everybody in MAGA world is now out of the wilderness and going to be returning? I mean, what's the mood like, and what's the lineup like, and what's going on at Turning Point?
Well, so I've got to admit, politicians and pundits going to political conference is not the most exciting headline. But when you take a closer look and you look at the group of people that Charlie has brought together under one banner, I think it tells part of the story of where we are with the current Republican Party. He not only got Donald Trump to deliver his first post-election rally there, which reflects sort of the significance and the honor that's given to this young lieutenant in sort of Trump's orbit. But he also, until recently, was going to have Speaker Mike Johnson speak there. Of course, the continuing resolution, Christmas time chaos blew all of that up. But then he has all of these different personalities, these different folks like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, and Ben Shapiro, individuals who not just on a political ground, but on a really deep ideological level, have some differences with one another. And so the reason why this conference is one to watch is because Republicans are trying to be unified. They're trying to make peace with one another. But in the aftermath of sort of a realignment election, like the one that Trump accomplished, where he was able to bring in a lot of different folks into the GOP tent, there's still going to be some tensions there. And, those tensions, they may have erupted, I think, this week in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, so what is the read on the Trump coalition and just the Republican Party in general? Because as you mentioned, I mean, it's victory solves a lot of issues, right? Winning helps, and paper over differences, and obviously losing exacerbates those problems, as we're seeing on the Democratic side now. But is it all? I mean, we've seen what's going on in Congress. We've seen these 38 Republicans vote against a bill that Donald Trump explicitly said he wanted to pass. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right, at this point. But is the Republican Party more unified than it's been in the past? And will they be able to get through this moment and be unified when Trump officially takes office next January?
One of the things about Trumpism that we've seen, not just during his first term, but in the years afterwards, is that a lot of Republicans were able to turn that into a puppet for their purposes. You had centrists who were out there saying that they were MAGA. You had conservatives arguing that they had the true mantle. And I think that you put your finger on the pulse there when you've got 38 Republicans, many of them House Freedom Caucus guys, rebel rousers, conservatives saying no to Donald Trump's proposed Plan B that Speaker Johnson put on the floor for keeping the government open and extending the debt ceiling. And I think that while there's a lot of unity in victory, what the sort of Trump orbit is discovering, guys like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, whose rhetoric over these last couple of days would have been more than welcome at like a Tea Party rally in 2012, that's not always congruent with what Donald Trump wanted. Remember, this whole fight over spending started with Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk saying, why are we spending money that we don't have? And then you had Donald Trump blow up the initial bipartisan deal, which would have spent a lot of money, and argue for extending the debt ceiling for 2 years. And he later said that his preference was to get rid of it altogether, to make government borrowing authority limitless. And so, as you see all of these folks descend on this Turning Point USA action event, I think that it is because, one, they want to be unified, they want to be with a winner, but two, the definition of Trumpism, of America first, when it actually gets to the details, when the rubber meets the road, that can often be in flux, and there's a fight over that. It's not over yet.
Well, I want to ask you about Chip Roy, because you just interviewed him for this very podcast last week, and now he's in the news again. Obviously, he is one who came out and said, look, I'm not voting to suspend the debt ceiling. He was one of the 38 and gave a very fiery speech on the floor of the House in defense of just ripping Republicans for being hypocrites, on, pretending to be deficit hawks, coming in there doing the exact same thing. They were going to, spend, I think he said, add 4.7 trillion to the debt by this move that Trump wanted. And Trump turned around and said, basically, hey, anybody in Texas want to run for Congress? We need some new challenge. So, I mean, it's a pretty legit threat from Trump, and this is what Joni Ernst and some of these other folks face. It's like, get in line or you're getting primary. I mean, that's it. That's hardball politics. I wonder how that's going to work and that's going to play. I mean, Chip Roy is, by most accounts, seems to be a pretty conservative guy. He's standing on principle, but as you mentioned, sometimes those principles can come into conflict with what the leader of the party wants. And if you don't get out of the way, you might get run over.
And I asked Roy about this sort of phenomenon that we see from Republicans. They talk about fiscal discipline when they're in the minority, and then when they're in charge, they run up the deficit. And I asked, is this just, the nature of the beast? His reply was that Republicans have never been fiscally responsible. And he's got a good argument to make based off of the numbers. A conservative might, complain and say, oh, they're not as bad as Democrats. But in Chip Roy and then in some of these other Freedom Caucus members, they actually believe it when they say we want to reduce debt and deficits. And so I think that in this case, you have something that's really instructive. Trump is not an ideologue, and he's never been one. You have a lot of Republicans when there's an opportunity to make their own argument that they say, oh, well, he's with us. He's all about X, Y, or Z. But that's just not the case. Donald Trump is not a populist. He's a popularist. He's going to do whatever he can do to remain popular. And I think this is a good example. You have these principled members of Congress who now are about to get steamrolled because they believe what they said. And I think that if you look at the fact that there's 38 Republicans in the House Republican Conference right now who didn't just defy Speaker Johnson, they defied Donald Trump. This could mean that the incoming president has trouble on his hands.
We're speaking with Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Phil, let's talk about the other side of the aisle. I mean, Democrats are obviously find themselves in again, depressed from the election, but suddenly gleeful at the prospect of Republicans forming a circular firing squad. And they're all standing around watching and applauding, sort of egging Republicans on. How do Democrats think this really is going to, accrue to their benefit? And how unified are they in facing this incoming administration?
So the other day, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance goes to the cameras after the Plan B fails, and he says, Democrats did that. But look, political arithmetic is the same as every other kind of arithmetic. All you have to do is count, and you can see that while Democrats tanked Plan B, Republicans were the ones who jumped ship. And Republicans currently, they control 1/2 of 1/3 of government. Schumer in the Senate knows that he holds the cards. And President Biden, well, we haven't seen much of him of late. Oh, by the way, he still has a veto pen. And so that's why, we heard from the White House today. They were saying this is Republicans' mess. It's time for Republicans to fix it. And I think that this kerfuffle makes them, feel like they have the high ground if, your gauge of morality is keeping, the trains running on time.
It definitely is a different vibe, though, with the incoming Trump administration from 2017. I mean, at this point, we had already had rallies and protests and all sorts of things. It's much quieter this time around, Phil. And I know, Trump said the other day, everybody loves me now. Everybody wants to be my friend. And he's taking in all these meetings at Mar-a-Lago, and everybody's giving him, buckets of cash for his transition. It is, it's a different environment for Democrats to be. It was easy for them to be unified against him. I mean, to the mats in 2017, even to the point of filing, impeachment proceedings against him, calling for impeachment proceedings against him just minutes after he was inaugurated. It seems like it's going to be different this time around, or he's going to have a honeymoon. Democrats will still be united against him, but it's definitely feels different this time.
So this is anecdotal, but after Donald Trump wins the election, there were planned protests in Washington, D.C. I live in this godforsaken city, and I thought this weekend it's going to be terrible to drive because the roads are going to be closed. There's going to be this groundswell of protesters from across the country, just like we saw with regards to the Women's March in 2017. And it didn't happen. I think that there's sort of an exhaustion, not just from Donald Trump, but from the overreaction and the hysteria. And after not just 4 years of a lot of Democratic complaints about Donald Trump, but going on a decade at this point, I think that the liberal base is exhausted, and it's difficult to sort of rally the troops, by the way, when there's no leader to say that things are going to be okay. President Biden's out for the count, and so is Vice President Harris.
All right, we will leave it there. Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Phil, great talking to you as always.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Informing you on the important issues of the day.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on POTUS, SiriusXM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and for our next segment, we've invited Charlie Stone, a contributor at RCP, to share his latest interview for the RCP video series, The Unknowns. Charlie's guest is journalist, attorney, and author Jack Ford, and now here's Charlie Stone in conversation with Jack Ford.
Let's get into which is crazy, the assassination of Brian Thompson. We now have the alleged killer caught. Give me your sense of that. Is this the guy?
What's interesting about it, and I'll give you my perspective as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. And although this will not be a death penalty case, and New York doesn't have the death penalty, I tried a half dozen death penalty cases. So, whenever I see a case like this, I look at it from, okay, I'm the prosecutor, how am I proceeding? And then I'll turn around and say, all right, if I'm the defense attorney, what can I do here? From the prosecution's perspective, it's pretty clear that they got the right guy. You got a video. Now, obviously, it's from behind, but you have all the other elements tied up around him and fingerprints and DNA. You have his activities. You have his so-called manifesto. So from the prosecutor's perspective, I think it's pretty clear, unless there's something out there we don't know, that they have the right guy. Which then, when you look at who this guy is, your question has to be, why? Right? Now, but a lot of people don't, that if you're prosecuting a case, you don't have to prove the why. You don't have to prove a motive. Most people think, based on television and movies, well, you need a motive, right? Otherwise, you can't get a conviction. You and I know that you don't. But boy, jurors really like to hear you answer, if you can, that question, why. It helps them when they get in the jury room. And you look at this guy, and there's no apparent why. And by all accounts, seems like a very normal, engaging kind of guy. And then all of a sudden he breaks. Literally and figuratively. Nobody's heard from him in 6 months. Friends are saying, where are you? I saw one text where a friend said, hey, man, I got my wedding coming up. You committed to me. I haven't heard from you. What's going on? Clearly, the parents are puzzled. So then you start to look at, all right, mental conditions. So that's the first thing. If I was his lawyer, the first thing I'm going to take a look at is get a really good forensic psychiatrist and say, let's spend some time with him and let's see, because the prosecutor doesn't have to prove a why, but you want to. The defense kind of has to come up with something here, because they're going to be confronted with a barrage of compelling evidence against them. And maybe that something becomes some type of an insanity defense. So
it does seem, though, that this is very well thought out. He tried to hide his tracks. It wasn't impulsive. I mean, he knew when the victim would be there. So I think that runs counter to someone just snapping, right?
Look, insanity defenses are really hard, primarily because jurors are just not comfortable. For an insanity defense, you have to admit you did it, and then you deal with the why. And jurors, understandably, are just not comfortable saying the words not guilty, even though you're tagging it with by reason of insanity, when they know somebody did it. And it's one of the reasons why they're difficult. As a matter of fact, the criminal defense attorneys have been lobbying for years, and some places have this, where you don't get a not guilty by reason of insanity verdict. You get a guilty, but insane or suffering from criminal insanity, something like that. And criminal defense attorneys have argued that would make it easier for jurors to recognize that, and not as hard for them to say that when they are faced with somebody who clearly and undeniably did it.
I assume the defendant will want a trial by jury. The jury pool is made up of normal, everyday citizens. Have you been surprised at least on social media, the reaction, this elevation of the alleged killer to almost cult status?
Yeah. The sad thing is that nowadays nothing surprises me anymore on social media. It's horrific to think that somebody could take a life and you would get essentially applause. I mean, a life of a man who shot him in the back, and what was his crime? That he was an executive with an insurance company. But that would generate plaudits from people. that we've heard this before, but I think this is where it certainly rings true, is social media is wonderful, except for when it isn't. And to me, sadly, I am not surprised to see this drumbeat of people out there that for some reason or feel it's appropriate to applaud him for taking another person's life.
Well, you obviously have a long career, and I mean that with all due respect. You've had a very vaulted career. Tell me how the news has changed. I mean, we all know the obvious. There are no editors on social media checking facts, right? So everything is going live. But give me your old statesman view. Like, what's wrong with the news these days?
If I ever let my opinion seep into my reporting, quite literally, you would be pulled off the air. Because the job was, theoretically then, it was actually then, I guess theoretically now, I looked at it as my job was to collect facts, to distill them, to package them, to get them out there. Even when I was acting as the legal analyst, I would never give my opinions on things. Just never believed my job was to either actually say it or say it in a way that viewers would say, yeah, I know where he stands on this thing. And then you talk about, you get online and, as you said, there are no editors. There are no fact checkers, and anybody who wants to can start posting some things and toss it out as some version of journalism. It's clearly not legitimate journalism, but it's out there, and it's become the world that we live in.
In some ways, I applaud the democratization of news gathering, right? Because in not the olden days, but before, it was a club, right? There were 3 or 4 different outlets that were...
That was it. When I started, there were 3 networks.
Nice club to be a part of. So I do applaud that sort of sense of like anybody can, be a journalist and, let's say, record drones over New Jersey, right? So the speed...
And by the way, there are some people doing really good work.
Yes.
Who are not within the traditional journalism silos.
The traditional outlets, I think, have just become obsessed with profit, right? Because it used to be that news used to lose money. Now it's a money maker as long as you gin up the crowd and get them excited about what they're passionate about. And unfortunately, I think that's a disservice. No?
When I first started doing stuff with CBS, basically the news division was told, you're okay. You don't have to make money. We have the entertainment division. They don't make money for us. You are doing a public service here. So we're going to give you a good budget. We're going to let you do documentaries. We're going to let you dig deeply into stories. Don't worry about the bottom line. Can you imagine anybody today running a news division of anything saying to their corporate bosses, you know what? I don't think we should have to worry about the bottom line because what we're doing is way too important.
Well, that leads to the conversation about just the division in this country, right? I mean, you've got some really deep divisions which concern many people of where this is going to result. I mean, so where do we go? Like, how do you're King Jack. I'm going to call you King Jack. How do you solve this? Like, where is the resonance that gives people pause to say, you know what? I'm not going to act like that.
One of the things I've come to realize is, I tend to think, I wish we could go back to the good old days. And I come to realize maybe there weren't that good old days in that fashion. Maybe they were a little bit better in some ways. We talk about our political division. You go back into the 1830s and 1840s, and you had people in Congress, calling each other out for duels. I'm a college student during the Vietnam War, and the divisions that settled in because of that, and violence and the civil rights movement. So I think it's just an answer to your question, Charlie. To me, the answer has always been conversation, a willingness to listen, not necessarily to change your mind, but at least a willingness to listen. What troubles me and saddens me is the absence of civil discourse and the notion that we have demonized politics in the sense that if you don't agree with me, you must be a bad person.
Jack, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Charlie, thank you so much for inviting me.
You've been listening to RCP contributor Charlie Stone in conversation with journalist, attorney, and author Jack Ford. You can hear and see more of Charlie's interview series. It's called The Unknowns on RealClearPolitics.com. It's good stuff and worth checking out. And that will do it for today's program. I'm Andrew Walworth, and on behalf of Carl, Tom, Charlie, and all of us here at RCP, thank you for listening. We'll be back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.
The
Politics
of
the
United
States. This is POTUS on SiriusXM Channel 124.